suing Fox News and its parent company over a fictional miniseries about his legal problems. Attorneys for the president's son allege that Fox sought to harass and humiliate him and publish explicit images without his permission. Fox News took down the mock trial miniseries from the streaming service. The Hill reports it received a statement from Fox in which the network says the lawsuit is politically motivated and devoid of merit. Doctors in Kansas are preparing to implement a new law that takes effect today. It requires them to ask patients seeking abortion care their reason for ending their pregnancy. Member station KMUW Rose Conlon reports some doctors are challenging the law in court.
Doctors will have to report patients' responses to state officials, who must publish anonymized data twice yearly. Anti-abortion rights groups say the data can be used to shape policies that support parents and reduce abortion rates. But doctors say collecting the information is invasive and medically unnecessary. A group of them have filed a legal challenge against the law and asked a judge to block it. The consequences would extend beyond Kansas borders because of the state's role as a key abortion access point for people from across the South and Midwest. For NPR News, I'm Rose Conlon in Wichita.
At last check on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 36 points. You're listening to NPR News.
This is WFAE News. I'm Kenneth Lee. Atrium Health has reached a settlement in a legal dispute with the heirs of Cannon Mills over the inheritance of millions of dollars. The Charlotte Observer reports that's according to a motion filed in state business court on Friday. The Cannon family, a prominent name in North Carolina textiles, filed a lawsuit in February. The dispute was over the rightful heir to the Cannon Trust, which was created in the 1960s and directed money to go to the then county-owned Cabarrus Memorial Hospital. That hospital eventually merged with Atrium, which argued it's entitled to the money. The Cannon family in the lawsuit argued Atrium was not the intended recipient of the trust. The settlement must still be approved by a court. A new flood disclosure rule takes effect today in North Carolina and makes disclosing flood history mandatory during the home buying process. Joel Scatta is an attorney with the Natural Resource Defense Council, a group that pushed for the rule.
With this new form, you'll be able to learn, has this house flooded, even if it's outside that floodplain, and is insurance required on that house because it's flooded in the past.
Climate change is exacerbating inland flooding across the state. Warmer atmosphere holds more moisture and rains harder during storms. This increases flooding inside and outside federally designated floodplains. In auto racing, Joey Logano, driver of Morrisville-based Team Penske, won at the Nashville Superspeedway after 5 attempts of NASCAR overtime. Zane Smith, Tyler Reddick, Ryan Preece, and Chris Buescher rounded out the top 5. NASCAR heads to the Chicago Street Course this weekend. This is WFAE News. You can find more news anytime at WFAE.org or on the WFAE mobile app.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance with its Name Your Price tool, a way to see coverage options based on a driver's budget. Learn more at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Support comes from WFAE listeners and Mazda of South Charlotte. Committed to drivers that share Mazda's passion, the car...
What port were they going to talk about?
What?
I heard they were going to talk about some port.
Oh yeah, the bridge that got hit by it.
In Baltimore?
Yeah.
I wanted to hear about that, because I wondered how
The competence ought to be celebrated too. We spend too much time talking about negative things, don't we? So today, as an antidote to these doom-scrolling times, we're going to talk about the coordination and effort that took place to clean up a massive disaster, and how the lessons from that success may be just as important as learning about the disaster that precipitated it.
It was the entire bridge, the entire key bridge in the harbor. I advise again, the entire key bridge has fallen into the harbor.
March 26th of this year. That was the 911 call made around 1:30 a.m. after the Dali, a massive container ship, crashed into Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. Live video footage showed the 980-foot-long, 158-foot-wide ship striking one of the bridge's piers. The key bridge collapsed entirely and instantly, killing 6 workers who'd been fixing potholes on the bridge's road above.
Wow.
Hundreds of thousands of pounds of steel wreckage were now in the waterway. The Port of Baltimore, one of the nation's busiest, was forced to shut down and was not expected to reopen anytime soon.
And I remember that morning, March 26th, the
Turn
only
the AC down.
was uncertain. And many said it would take multiple months. Some said even up to a year.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore.
Well, Maryland, this team did the unimaginable by many. And instead of 11 months, he got this thing done in 11 weeks.
Well, that was just last month, June 12th. Governor Moore announced the reopening of the Port of Baltimore.
You hear that? That's a beautiful sound.
Crews not only had to move the Dali from the Patapsco River, they also had to clear more than 50,000 tons of debris out of the water.
We made today happen. This has been a remarkably complex operation spanning multiple objectives, hundreds of assets, and thousands of people.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. What it took to reopen one of the nation's busiest ports, and also what comes next for bridge design, and a little bit more about what we know about why the Dali rammed the Francis Scott Key Bridge in the first place. And we're going to start with Hayes Gardner. He's an enterprise writer at the Baltimore Sun. He's been covering the Dali disaster and the cleanup of the Port of Baltimore pretty much daily since the disaster happened. He joins us from Baltimore. Hayes, welcome to On Point.
Thanks, Magna. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so first of all, take us back to the early morning in May. When and how did you first hear about this, like, almost unimaginable disaster?
Sure, I think everyone in Baltimore remembers how they learned March 26th about what happened. Like most people, I was asleep. I got a call at 3:45.
Hayes, you with us?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Looks like your line was dropping out for a second there. I'm going to let you complete here in a second, but I want to apologize. I said the disaster in May, but you're right. It was March. But keep going. So tell us again where you said everyone in Baltimore remembers where they were when they found out. So where were you?
Yeah, so I was asleep, and I got a phone call from our sports editor in the middle of the night, and I was confused why he would be calling me. I texted him back and said, "Did you mean to call me?" Of course, he called me back immediately. We discussed what had happened. He said they were, gathering reporters to cover this, and for the rest of that day it was kind of a hectic blur as we began to cover the event.
Well, but Hayes, let me just ask you okay, first of all, when you got the call from the sports editor, you were probably imagining, wait, did one of Baltimore's teams win something unexpectedly? But when he said the bridge has collapsed, I mean, did you kind of do a double take? Did you wonder if you were like it was too early in the morning, you didn't hear him properly?
Yeah, absolutely. I was confused. I didn't know what he meant by collapse, and I thought perhaps a piece of the bridge had been damaged or something. When you hear the word collapse in a bridge, you don't think that what happened could actually happen, given just the severity of it. So I was confused, and I was still half asleep. So I was like, I must not be fully grasping this. My eyes were half closed as I'm hearing those words, and I quickly got on a call with other editors, and of course there was video of the incident going around. So almost within minutes you could see what had happened, and that's when it dawns on you. Okay, this entire span has fallen into the water, but it took the video to really imprint on me what exactly had happened.
Yeah, so we're much later in the show. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the NTSB has said so far in their preliminary report about why the Dali rammed the bridge. But we're delighted you could join us today because just a week after the
the collapse happened, you actually were able to get on a U.S. Coast Guard boat, right? And saw the wreckage. So tell us, what did that look like? What did you see?
Sure. So that day I got on a Coast Guard boat from the cruise ship terminal here in Baltimore. So disasters require improvisation, and the cruise ship terminal had turned into this hub of activity for Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, etc. And they're all bustling around while there's these tropical photos on the wall. So it's this bizarre juxtaposition. And I went on a Coast Guard boat, and the sheer size was hard to comprehend. I mean, any container ship that's 1,000 feet long, over 100,000 tons, is hard to fathom. Harder to fathom once you get close to it. We were, I think, probably 15 feet from it, and seeing the containers shredded, like they got through a paper shredder, was it was jarring to see. There were light poles sticking up from out of the water. There were bits of roadway, and then like 2,000 feet from the ship, there's just huge pieces of bridge sticking out of the water. And cleaning it up, because at that point it had already been a key priority by authorities, was to clear the channel. And doing so seemed, in my eyes at the time, it seemed insurmountable. Just the volume that needed to be cleared out. And I saw these two workers in a basket using a torch to cut up this piece of cement, and it was, this piece of cement was smaller than 3 feet by 3 feet probably, not a huge piece of cement. I was thinking, what's the point of that? Like, that is so small compared to this entire operation, that like this will never get all done. But of course the way to get it done is by small pieces. There's the joke, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And so you have to do these little bitty pieces to then they pull up these huge pieces of bridge on several different occasions. So seeing it for myself firsthand was jarring, and I still think about all of that wreckage, and it's just the sheer size of it.
So, honestly, what you're describing has sort of like disaster movie quality to it, right? Like, I'm just trying to imagine, like, looking down in the water and seeing light poles sticking up out of the water, and giant sections of roadway and mangled steel, and like you said, the shredded containers themselves, which is kind of mind-boggling. Can you remind us how big the bridge was while it was still standing, in terms of the number of lanes it had on it, etc.?
So the bridge is 4 lanes, and it's over a mile long, the whole thing, but what fell is about a little over 3,000 feet. I think it's over 2,500, I think it's over 3,000 feet, all fell at once. And that's the main, and that includes that primary span where ships would go under, and it includes 2 other spans. So it was, thousands of feet of roadway, 4 lanes of roadway. On that, when we went out on the Coast Guard boat a week after, there was you could see a speed limit sign kind of like almost embedded into some roadway. It was upside down, but we could see the 55 speed limit sign. So you could see on a bridge just all mangled together and just strewn about in the Patapsco River.
Wow, 3,000 feet of bridge. Okay, so then as we heard that tape from Governor Moore just a couple of minutes ago, in the first days and weeks after the scope and scale of what the cleanup would have to accomplish was understood, what were the initial estimates of how long it would take those, thousands of tons of debris to take that stuff out of the water?
Sure. So authorities were kind of hesitant to put a timeline on it immediately, because each of these, when something like this happens, there's almost no precedent. Bridges have collapsed before, but each one is different. So I was unsure on the timeline. I spoke to a couple experts in clearing up disasters like this, who it ranged from at least a few months to several months or longer. So there was not a concrete estimate, but you knew it'd be at least a few months, perhaps several months. So you knew it'd be a while, but each one's different. So it could have taken much longer than that. Just no one knew at first.
Mm-hmm. But to be frank, obviously the pressure was on from the start because the port got shut down because of this disaster, right? And as we said, the port of Baltimore is one of the nation's busiest. So you're talking about hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of commerce and jobs on the line.
Yes, exactly. So the governor and other leaders immediately named a few priorities. The first was to find the bodies of the 6 men who were killed on the bridge. But another priority was to reopen that shipping lane, and that was a priority from the beginning. And to, even as the salvage was ongoing, open up temporary lanes for commercial ships. Because of the importance, Port of Baltimore is one of the busiest in the nation. It's the busiest in terms of bringing cars, and so it's integral to the region and nation's economy. So that was a key priority, and employing so many people in the Baltimore area. So opening the port was a clear priority from the beginning.
Well, Hayes Gardner with the Baltimore Sun, hang on for just a minute. When we come back, we're going to hear from a colonel in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers about the nuts and bolts of how the cleanup happened. So more in a moment. This is On Point.
Good afternoon, it's 2:19 and you're listening to On Point. This hour discussing what it took to reopen one of the nation's busiest ports. On Point continues in a moment on 90.7 WFAE. I'm Mike Samansky. Mostly clear tonight in and around the Charlotte area. Look for a low near 64. Sunny tomorrow and 85.
Hi, I'm Scott Horsley from NPR News. You know, people collect all kinds of things. Stamps, antique lamps,
Oh, I wanted to hear the rest of the port thing.
I'm gonna turn it on in a minute if the bullshit stops.
on this station's website. There's cars.
Support for On Point comes from the listeners of WBUR Boston and the Music Emporium, guitar sellers for more than 50 years, celebrating the enduring presence of music made on the front porch and center stage. You can learn more at themusicemporium.com and Insurify.com. Today is Monday, July 1st. Insurify is an insurance comparison site that is proud to sponsor NPR. INSURIFY.
You're back with On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Just a quick note on something before we get back to today's conversation. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about political polarization and sports. So did you see sports, or maybe do you even still see sports as one of the remaining unifying forces in American life?
That's an interesting topic too.
Can get together to root for their hometown teams. Is that still true, or have political differences and grievances made their way onto the field, the court, the ice in a way that's changed your enjoyment of the game? So let us know. You can do so preferably via the On Point Vox Pop app. Just go to wherever you get your apps, look for On Point Vox Pop, and that way you can send us a really high quality message, or you can also still, as always, leave us a voicemail at 617-353-0683. That's 617-353-0683. That's for tomorrow. Today we are talking about, and yes, I'll say it, we are celebrating the effort and coordination and accomplishment it took to reopen the Port of Baltimore in just 11 weeks after that major disaster when the Dolly container ship rammed into and collapsed the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It was hard to believe 11 weeks ago that the cleanup would be complete, and yet it is. So we want to learn how that happened and celebrate competence for once in the media. So Hayes Gardner is with us today. He's enterprise writer at the Baltimore Sun. He's been covering the Dolly and the Port of Baltimore pretty pretty much since the day of the collapse back in March. And joining us now is Colonel Esty Pinchason. She's U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Baltimore District Commander. Colonel Pinchason, welcome to On Point.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Okay, so first and foremost, Colonel, I'm sure that in your military experience you've probably seen a lot, but when you first got word on March 26th that this major transportation, engineering, human disaster had happened, how did you find out, and what was one of the first things you did?
The way I found out was my mother-in-law called me. She is a very early bird, and she was the first one to call. It was quickly followed by phone calls from within our organization, but I did think it was funny that she was the first one to alert me super early in the morning, so I feel like maybe we have to hire her into our emergency operations.
Well, God bless your mother-in-law for being on the ball.
She's amazing, yes, she's on it. So I knew right away when we were talking that would have an impact on our community. And then as the phone calls came in immediately after, the first thing we were doing was just making sure we had accountability of everybody, as were most organizations in the area. I think that for us, for the Baltimore district, the Fort McHenry channel, the main shipping channel that comes into the Port of Baltimore, is one that we maintain all the time. We maintain that depth of 50 feet to bring traffic into the Port of Baltimore. So we knew that was going to be the major part for us. But the overarching mission that we were going to be supporting was the search and rescue operation right away. That was the number one priority.
And I'm glad both of you have mentioned that because, yes.
Speech on. Viewfinder. Zoom. View 21 minutes. 52 seconds. Viewfinder. Camera control. 21 minute. Viewfinder. 21 minutes.
Now, Colonel,
Speech off.
You said that you, meaning the Army Corps, maintains the Fort McHenry waterway. Does that mean? Tell me a little bit more about what responsibility that entails. What does it mean that you maintain it?
One of the key missions for the Corps of Engineers is maintaining federal navigation channels. You have lots of channels on different waterways throughout the United States, and there's a portion of them that are designated federal navigation channels that we're charged with maintaining. The Baltimore district has about 90 channels that we maintain at a certain authorized depth. And so this channel in particular is authorized to be maintained, or the federal government is responsible for keeping it at that depth to enable traffic, to enable that type of shipping traffic into the Port of Baltimore.
I see. So keeping the waterway at 50 feet deep constantly. Right. Okay. Is it actually deeper than that, or is it about that deep now?
There are portions right now, especially as we had to dredge below that depth to make sure we didn't leave any steel behind, that are. But within the Port of Baltimore, all the features within the harbor, they're at about 50 feet. There are areas that might be a little deeper if we had to create an area to prevent shoaling. Sometimes there's a little bit of over depth that's dredged. But mainly where the depth is authorized at 50, that's where it's maintained. There are portions that are authorized at 42. There are other areas that have a different depth based on the traffic that they handle and the needs of that particular inlet or waterway.
So now, along with Hayes' description, we're getting a clearer physical sense about the size of the cleanup that had to happen, right? Because as Hayes said, we're talking about 3,000-ish feet of bridge span that collapsed, and now to a depth of 50 feet in the waterway, plus more because of the dredging that had to do. So, Colonel, can you describe to us then, you and your team, I presume, arrive at the scene. You also have the ship, right? The Dali, which is crippled, and it's 100,000 tons, right? It's a massive cargo ship. How do you decide where you begin? After the search and rescue, where you begin a cleanup operation like this? Tell us that story.
I think it's important for the top, I guess, key to our success has been using the right people, getting the right tools, and using the right group of people to help us get after this. Salvage operations require very niche type of skill and experience and expertise, and that is not a mission or the expertise of the Corps of Engineers, even though we are responsible for maintaining the channel. So we brought in the United States Navy's supervisor of salvage, and that was from day one. That was an immediate, on day one, within hours, we had the Navy salvage experts coming on in because of a pre-existing interagency agreement that I think was critical to our success. To be able to have salvers on the site within hours, driving up from DC and Norfolk and down from New Jersey, to be able to join that team, create that team immediately to start assessing and have the right people looking at this problem, I think was the foundation to the success.
Okay, and so then what did they excuse me, Colonel, what did they do? I'll just come out in a minute. I kind of want to nerd out with you a little bit here.
Let's nerd out. So remember, on the first day, it was really a search and rescue operation, but you have to be able to do things in parallel. So while the Maryland Transportation Authority Police and Maryland State Police were teaming up with dive operations, the Corps of Engineers was supporting those operations with structural engineers that had urban search and rescue experience to be able to assess where the divers could go in and do that and conduct their operations safely. It was very tricky to be able to send people into an area there that we haven't had an opportunity yet to study and know that it's safe for the divers to go in, so we don't have any more casualties on the site. So you've got that going on while you have the salvers coming in to figure out how are we going to go and attack this as the mission progresses. We were very lucky that just down the river, the Harry Nice Bridge, if you remember, that whole construction operation was going on, and that same contractor, Skanska, who was working on that bridge, was on the scene for the state and immediately produced a layout and an incredible, a set of drawings that laid out the entire span of the bridge. I wish I could show it to you so you can see the visual. It showed how the bridge used to be, where the spans fell in the ground, into the water, how it was laying on the riverbed, and what span was located where and what location. It really served as an orientation all the way through the entire operation. That same drawing that we received on day one from Skanska, who became a part of this team, helped orient everybody as to the portion of their work.
Yeah. Hold on here for just a second, Colonel. Hayes, I know you're still there. I just want to remind you that I haven't forgotten about you, but let me continue the salvage nerdery with the Colonel here for just a second, because when you talk about so you had this incredible drawing, which I imagine was invaluable, right? Because although there would have to be considerable time spent, I guess, doing soundings to figure out where all the debris was. You mentioned divers and salvers. So quickly, like, what were the divers doing, and how was the wreckage dragged out of the waterway?
So you have the different types of divers. Your search and rescue divers ended up being your recovery divers on the second day, and at that point it wasn't safe anymore. You had to start lifting wreckage to be able to get to them. At that time, we spent a few days, more than a few days, really analyzing the wreckage, how it was laying on the bottom. So you had divers that were part of the salvage teams. We did bring in the Coda Octopus through the Navy Supervisor of Salvage, Soup Sal, that helped us get 3D imagery of how the wreckage was laying. And what made it so complex was that, and I guess we've described it this way before, there's so much stored energy inside the wreckage into how it was bent, compressed, contorted, and mangled. I always described it like a spring, where if you pull a spring that's in tension and then you cut it, because that we knew we were going to have to break it up, but if you were to cut something that's under tension, it would snap. Now you have these massive steel trusses that are under tension, and you could see from above the water that there was so much force that these were bent and misshapen, that you know that there's a lot of tension under there. We certainly didn't want it to be dangerous. Thanks to the help of our salvers, we were able to see how the wreckage was laying on the bottom of the riverbed. You had portions that were just completely mangled and collapsed on itself within the roadbed. So the divers would have to be going down below to confirm whether something was connected or not. They would literally be feeling whether or not a steel member was connected. Would that have to be severed, or was it able to be lifted? So there was another set of eyes to take you beyond 3D imagery that we were getting under the surface.
Oh, let me say, now we're getting to the nitty gritty, Colonel, because I hadn't even thought of the fact that lots of the steel wreckage could be in tension. I mean, in fact, I think the presumption is the exact opposite, that when a bridge collapses, whatever tension forces were holding it up were immediately released, but that is not the case, because everything's been like rebent once it hit the water and the bed underneath it. Okay, so Hayes, you wrote about this because eventually, through the process that the Colonel is describing, that 50,000 tons of steel was slowly but methodically removed from the water. What happened to it? I heard a lot of it got recycled.
Yes, so it was great to hear the Colonel's description. The diving part always fascinates me, that it's so hard to see it at those depths, that a lot of it was being guided by audio. But yes, that
audio. Sorry, audio meaning like actually like pinging audio.
Well, the Colonel could explain it better than me, but I believe the divers were being told where to look. Colonel,
I see.
You weigh in?
Yeah, so it's really hard to understand. When you think of diving, you might think of, gorgeous scuba diving with clear water, but that was not the case here. The divers only had 1 to 2 feet of visibility in front of them if they were lucky. And what they were diving in were very dangerous and unforgiving conditions. If you ever listen to the videos that are have been posted, you hear a lot of clinking, and that's steel that's hitting the divers' helmets. It's very, very dangerous. They were guided by operators up top, sitting on either barges or vessels up top on the surface, guiding their hands through in order to feel for.
So essentially, sighted guide.
Really
holy shit!
Confirm how the steel was laying.
They were doing that shit, sighted guide, bro.
They were also involved in the salvage operations themselves. You had these massive steel trusses that you see above the water, and people might think that that's all that it was, but underneath the surface, you had a tremendous amount of reinforced concrete, the roadbed, everything that was supporting from underneath, and those items needed also to be broken up. The steel trusses themselves were cut up into several 100-ton pieces. Those are those bite-sized pieces that are several 100 tons each, if you can imagine. And when you look at the water and you see the truss laying there on the top, you have those cords. Those are the top cords of the truss. You have the bottom cords of the truss that were actually buried in the mud.
Oh, wow.
So you had to get to those, and to be able to cut those, you actually had to dig them out. And every single lift was engineered, and I can geek out a little for you, but they had to figure out how they were going to lift these, where they were going to cut them, and how they were going to be able to successfully lift them out of the water without compromising the equipment that we had. We brought in the Chesapeake 1000, or known as the Chessie, and it's a 1,000-ton derrick craning. It doesn't rotate. The largest on the East Coast, but you still have the limits of the angles that you have to be able to take that. So there was a lot of pre-rigging that had to happen, where the chains themselves would be rigged up to other cranes and then moved over onto the Chesapeake, and it was lifted very slowly. I know we talk a lot about the divers. I feel like we have to give a huge shout out to our crane operators who are lifting these loads, who can feel how the load is reacting. I also think that it was new to me. Salvage was new to me completely, and understanding how it's planned and how with each layer that's lifted, you go back and reassess to see what the next step is. How did the load react after you just pulled stuff out? One of the most challenging portions was, like I mentioned, digging out the bottom cord, and they literally had to cut through kind of like a window within the truss in order to lower a salvage bucket to the bottom of the riverbed and dig out the wreckage that was sitting on top of that bottom cord in order to then lower a diamond wire saw down to that bottom cord that was guided by divers to put it in place. The divers go back up, and then that allows the diamond wire saw for several hours to make a cut of that bottom cord.
Colonel, hang on here for just a second. Just have 15 seconds before we have to get to our next break. Hayes, when we come back, I do want to hear about what happened to all that steel, and then we're going to talk about what's going to take to rebuild the bridge. So all of that in a moment. This is On Point.
Wow, this stuff is awesome.
Do you believe it was by sound and not sight?
Yeah, and feel too.
Yeah, feel.
They were literally going sighted guide in that shit. You gotta have some balls. Do you think crossing the street and shit is crazy? You gotta have some balls to do that.
Yeah, a lot of trust.
Yeah. I mean, this ain't 20 miles.
World's
This ain't 20, 25 miles an hour or pedestrianized Glenwood Avenue. This is a freaking cargo ship in the river.
The cargo ship was floating.
Yeah.
It was the bridge and the pylons.
Yeah, that's a big time shit.
The road.
Yeah.
I
we
want to see why the ship fucked up and hit the thing. This is what I'm interested in.
Classica Homes. Designing custom homes and neighborhoods, Classica offers the same custom experience when building on one's personal lot. Model homes in South Charlotte, Huntersville, and Fort Mill are open daily. More at classicahomes.com. And also the Original Mattress Factory, providing...
Guess what I'm going to have to do when I get to Hatito?
be.
So you got to move, okay?
Okay.
Information at originalmattress.com.
Support for On Point comes from WBUR Boston, from the Museum of Science in Boston, dedicated to inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone, in museums, classrooms,
Siri,
and
what's my battery
online,
level?
offering engineering design challenges, digital experiences, live presentations, and more. MOS.org. And MathWorks, creators of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
Zoom, viewfinder, speech off.
This is On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty, and just a quick note before we get back to today's conversation, go over to our podcast feed, the On Point podcast feed, because we have a special drop there today. It has to do with the experience that parents of gender questioning children have had, and it's a broad range of experiences. This is related to the show we had a couple of months ago featuring Dr. Hilary Cass out of the UK. She
Very easy. Boy, take that skirt off before I kick your ass.
Huh?
So that's how you fix that. Boy, take that skirt off before I kick your ass.
It's deeper than that.
Oh, horse shit.
It's like it's like not having fun on Glenwood Avenue.
Well, I mean, your brother's not gay. He's just fucking depressed and fucked up in the head.
Yeah, well, not gay. It's gender questioning. Gay people and lesbian people know what gender they are. They just like the same shit. And it's called gender dysmorphia.
Dysphoria or dysmorphia?
Well, no, there's gender dysphoria, but there's also like dysmorphia where you believe you're something you're not.
Oh my God.
What?
That's fucked up, Joe.
No shit, Sherlock.
Come Come on, lady, move your ass before I piss on myself. Great.
What?
Now somebody else is blocking the damn road. A big motherfucker. Good lady. Good for you. Figured out how to do that. Okay. You need to do some adulting.
What?
You're gonna ask for your medicine while I go pee.
I don't even know what medicine I'm asking for.
Oh yeah, there's down your name. It's your crazy people medicine. Hurry up, please.